Beloved friends, welcome to this live lecture. Everything should be working there. And we're talking today about a very important subject. We'll jump straight into it today. We're talking about something that is an intermediate practice. So if you're not going to understand what's being talked about here if you're not religious, if you're not involved in religious practice. And even regarding that, it's something that comes along in an intermediate way in the depths of concentration without effort, which is a practice talked about by Valentin Tomberg in Christian mysticism. So bear that in mind when you're listening today. And so it's helping to understand what divine breath is and what grace is in a very practical and real way, a concrete way. And so when we want to understand this divine breath and how to collaborate with the Angeloi, angels, Angeloi is a better term to talk about it. People like the Greek, and it's also properly situated in an ancient context when you use the word Angeloi. And so, how do we understand what this divine breath is? How, in the ancient world, and for the apostles, breath, which is both horizontal and vertical, horizontal as in the space that is around us and that we are. The space of the senses is the horizontal. That's what that means. Physicality. Or what I've often called facticity, which is what Heidegger uses. That's the horizontal. Physical breath is the horizontal. But in the ancient world, vertical breathing and horizontal breathing were united. Divine breath, physical breath were united. What does that mean? It means that fundamentally, the ancients and the apostles, breath was at the same time deep prayer. It was at the same time as it was physical contemplation of God, understanding of God, meditation with God, union with God, reverence and worship of the divine, understanding of and insight into the eternal, and human feeling, willing, and thinking. And so that's what we want to return to. And that's what, in initiation and in Christian mysticism, we move towards. It's grace in a very real way. And so the purpose of this lecture is to show the intermediate practice and grace of realigning vertical and horizontal breathing. And you don't do it. But the point is to understand also we want to talk about how Christianity is just so polar opposite to any Eastern practice. And we're going to go back and deep into that, the difference of what Christian breathing is. Christian breathing. And so, like I said, in ancient times, things were different. But the memory of that total breathing still exists in the Eastern practice of the Jesus prayer, where you attend the belly and you let the breathing determine the speed of the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon me, a sinner. That's how they do it. That's how we do it. And that's where the long chain of being, I guess you could call it, from the ancients, it's seen in that Jesus prayer. And so there's a text called The Way of the Pilgrim, where he talks about, it's a Russian text, where he talks about waking up and his physical body is saying the Jesus prayer, speaking the Jesus prayer. His heart is beating to the Jesus prayer. And this is part of that praying unceasingly that must be established to reestablish this connection of physical, divine breath, to have the divine breath with us. It's a thing that requires temperance and patience because it's a long process for it to be revealed and disclosed to you. And so we see that with Paul when he talks about praying without ceasing, but you can't necessarily do that in the conscious. That's why the Jesus prayer is there. It's because it, as we'll talk about in slides as they come up in this lecture, it leads from the conscious into the unconscious where it is permanent, into the vital body and the psychological body, which is nothing more than your memory, which you interact with in dreams. And so our hope is to reunify these things: vertical prayer, meditation, and physical breathing. This is part of the healing of the ravages of modernity in the human being. We wish to breathe in union with God, to have him breathe in and through us again. That might be a bit mysterious to understand, but you'll understand hopefully better as we progress through this. And so I've talked a bit about this already, but as you can see here at the bottom, you can carry over the praying unceasingly into the unconscious with the Jesus prayer. And we'll talk about that more as we go on. But that's how we move towards grace, which we'll also talk about and explain. But to further understand this, like I said, we need to understand the difference between the West and the East. Now, what is the difference between the West and the East when it comes to these practices? Of course, it's a difference of grace. Or let's talk about it this way. The West, we put all our creative genius into our physical technology, into the things of the world. The East put all of its creative energy into spiritual technology. But our spirituality is the polar opposite to that, luckily. They enact, or their spirituality relies on the principle of technology. It's an enacted power with a direct result, a procedure that has a predictable outcome that is in control of the low empirical subject. He enacts the technology, and like a slave, it affects the outcome. Like your iPhone, you press the button and that happens. That's the principle of technology. The West is the principle of grace and rhythm. One is a crystallized, dead technique that may work in its humanist way, but not in a divine way. And the West is a collaboration. That's why it's the principle of grace. And rhythm, something living, something alive, real divine beings. And so further on we go to understand this. So what are some examples of Eastern spiritual technology? Firstly, the Tibetans have a prayer wheel, and it's said to be a prayer merely if the wind rolls the wheels. You see the automatism in that? Secondly, there's no personality in that, is there? There's no relationship between the Divine Father and a real, authentic, meant and felt prayer. It's a technology. And so, secondly, I think this is from the Prayana. Can't remember the exact quote of the text. I was supposed to grab the name of the text here. But they talk about the empirical subjects enacting of a technique to silence mental substance in their practices, their concentration practices. That's bottom up, isn't it? It's a technique that brings about an efficient outcome. Technology. 3, then you also have Kundalini, breathing exercises, which comes from Hatha Yoga. These are, again, they're like Wim Hof. It's a technology. It's determined by the low empirical subject, how many breaths, whatever it is, and it's controlled by them to try bring about some sort of desire, temporal desire, worldly desire, an outcome that the yogi wants to bring about. Also from the same text, which I'll put in the Discord for the Greenwood Fellowship, I'll put the quotes for the text that they're from. These are from Valentin Tomberg, a very reliable source. And you should look at Valentin Tomberg. Of course, it's the most important spiritual book in the last 200 years, Meditations on the Tarot, which a lot of this is a citation for what we're talking about today, a key citation. And so the yogi uses or finds useful a personal God merely as a means to actualize the transcendent self. And afterwards, it's discarded. It's not needed anymore. He has mastery now. The ego has, you have mastery now over the world. And after that, there are no divine beings. There's no contact with Angeloi, no contact with gods. The personal God is merely a tool. And you can see that in the results of what happens. That's another example of the East. And so a good analogy of this is when it relates to Kundalini, because that's the broad way, because there's no purification. The wings of the bat are reaching upward, trying to, not cleaning, not purifying oneself. And that's where you have all that mental illness that comes from, again, you see this with Wim Hof, mental illness that comes about because all the forces of the unconscious are lifted at the same time without dealing with the will to power, without dealing with the egoism. But even with the Hatha Yoga, if there's some form of purification, because it does involve a sobriety, even with that, that can be considered the wings of Icarus because it's humanist. It's still brought about by the subject as a technology. And what happens to Icarus when he gets too close to the sun? The wings melt off. And as we've talked about in the previous streams about this East-West divide, the East consciousness is annihilated, not being. Being is not, it's not being that's dissolved, it's consciousness. And as the Master said, as the Lord said, those that came before me are thieves and robbers. That's also those who reach before me, before his rank as the way to the Father. He's the Lord that guides you, not your technology. That's you reaching before him. He's before you. He'll show you the way to the Father. That's why he says that. Those that came before me are thieves and robbers. Also, I came so that you could have life abundantly, not to annihilate it. And that's what happens to these Easterners, is they can no longer have the gift of tears and interaction with divine beings. They lose the ability to cry. But those things, as we know from Christian mysticism, these are divine. It's the faculty of sympathy that opens up this whole thing, opens up these divine faculties, these unconscious faculties. It's low feeling that's dissolved and then replaced with divine feeling in Christian mysticism. It's not annihilated. That's why Christ came. He's human and God. But, moving on, a lot of that is wrapped up, especially these days, and why it's such a disturbing penetration in the West. It's now become a method of attack to cut off Westerners from the authentic way to the true God and a relationship with him. These techniques. And they're tied up with the will to power. They're tied up with a Luciferian desire to not have to rely on the world at all, to be free. Because we know from the Buddha diagnoses the world as sick. His cure, and he's right, the world is sick. Jesus makes the same diagnosis. Again, Jesus is God, but Buddha, his cure is not to, there's no saving anyone. It's no saving it. It's just, this is an illness, and so the only solution is to leave. That's why it's all considered an illusion. Jesus knows that it can be saved, and the kingdom of heaven can be brought to earth and will be brought to earth because he's God. So there's two different approaches to the illness. One is pre-God coming to earth, when humanity was in a stage of preparation to receive the incarnation. So, all of this is not so with the West and the East, in the terms of the West as in Europeans, and that includes Russia, the Eastern Orthodoxy, Christianity. That's what I mean. Not so with Christianity. When it comes to the silencing of mental substance, as we know from St. John of the Cross, he says, though of course there is a preparatory practice, but in the final analysis and the ultimate understanding, it's always collaborative. And so, as St. John of the Cross says in his mystical books, it's sheer grace that brings about the silence. And that's true, I can tell you from direct experience, is that first, in your concentration without effort, you're learning, and we'll talk about why and how you're learning how to collaborate with grace as we go on. But you're facing the thoughts that pop up are important temptations, because Lucifer and Satan are right next to you. The hypnotic temptations of the world being Satan, subjective temptations of the ego being Lucifer. These thoughts are sent to you during your morning prayer practices, interrupting the silence. And like Christ, you are withdrawing like Christ into the wilderness each morning. That's what's happening. And you face similar archetypal temptations. You have to overcome them by rejecting the temptation. So once those temptations are rejected, sheer grace can approach you, but you have to clear it first, your will to power first. And there has to be this understanding that it's not. And you learn this because you might be trained. Western people are very lusty in a different way and tied up with will to power. But what you recognize over this process and have to keep reminding yourself of is that you're not bringing about the effects. You're just doing your half of things. It's like that painting when the painting in, it's a Renaissance painting of the man reaching out to God. Of course, God has to lift you up. The gravity of God must lift you up. And that's what this is also about. It's about how to raise these currents. What are wings? We're supposed to develop wings. This is about developing wings that come through prayer. The wings are wings of the vital and the psychological body. They're currents. And you can't bring it about yourself. It has to be granted by God. That's why reality fundamentally is moral. It has to be brought about by God. In collaboration, though. But you have to be able to raise the wings, let's say. Anyway, we only have arms because of will to grasp things. We only have legs because of a will to advance. The will's more fundamental than the physical. And it's actually what brings about what we are physically. It's a fundamental will. But there's, of course, beneath that, there's things more fundamental than will. But anyway, slightly beside the point. So back to this idea of the West. What's the difference? We see this a bit in the quote from St. Paul when he says, and I probably don't get this 100% correct, this quote is that it's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. This is not a metaphor. It's It's not a symbol. It's a literal. There's so many things that it's very difficult. Some things are in the Bible and the letters and what the apostles say is that some things are symbolic, some things aren't. But that's the whole work of working out what these things are. But that's what we're getting at. It's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. That's what we're developing in this process. How to prepare ourselves to collaborate with grace and receive it. And so that's another clue there of the difference. You see this again in the rhythm of the Jesus prayer. You see this in the rhythm and memorizing of the Psalms of the Irish monks. Day by day, it's this principle of rhythm, the principle of relationship and rhythm. We do our bit. And so silence is brought about in collaboration of effort and grace. And you'll get a better idea of what that is as we go on. In the depths of your concentration without effort, practice, which helps you learn and understand this. I've said most of that. Sheer grace, as I said. I think I've also said this stuff too. So that's that. Those who came before me are thieves and robbers has two meanings. It's came before me, as in before I came as God to show you the way of initiation, the true way of initiation, the true way of coming to the Father. But also, again, as an essential fact, he's between you and the Father. He's at the ground of the psyche, and the ground of the object and world. Of course, where you are needs to be purified and dissolved so you can reach towards that. But if you use these technological practices, you're trying to reach before him. And where you'll end up in is the belt of lies. You'll end up in Lucifer's domain, and this is what happens, is that some powers are granted to people who go that way, but it ends up being if you don't go following grace, it'll look like you have mastery over these things, and a spirituality will be presented to you, but it will just be the demons of the air that's shown to you. And your ego will inflate. And this is what happens with people that do this Kundalini and do this, these types of yogas. They inflate and they become unstable and get illnesses. And they're very subtle illnesses related to the will to power. One day they might seem like they love everyone. The next day they're judgmental of everyone. Yeah. In the best case scenario with Buddhism, it can be a decent humanism where it calms you down, makes you more docile and less polluted by the provokings and emotions of the world. But if you continue it to its ground, that's what happens. If you continue it all the way, again, they can only be stepping stones to the truth. Those things came from a different time before Christ. These things were perhaps appropriate before he came and incarnated, but now it's not. It's to follow him. And so the only way is through him, and that's part of recognizing grace. And again, in these practices, it's preparing you for that. If you try to reach past him like a groundless Übermensch rather than doing the spiritual art of collaborating with him acting in you as a literal, you cut off contact from him and the possibility of interaction with divine beings, his Angeloi, his angels. The only way is through him, as I said. And we could add to Paul's quote there, it's not I who acts, but Christ who lives and acts in me. We could also add, moving me. breathing with my body into my soul. So you can study the East, but in our epoch, like I said, Eastern practice is now a spiritual attack to take us off the path of the narrow way. In modernity, we are to de-technicalize our being, where a whole way of thinking became technicalized, our external technologies. To bring in technologies into spirituality is putting in place the proper access to the truth in the proper way. More technology. We already have it on the intellectual layer. To shove it in the spiritual layer is even more dangerous and a permanent danger. And that's why it's happening now. They'll only worsen our connection to the dead technical thought regime, as I call it. But consider it this way. Regarding breathing, the forces of the unconscious in your vital body and the forces of your physical body, they're a marvel of creation and a very delicate balance. The idea that you could come up with a technique as the low empirical subject, even if you're grinding evolutionarily, the idea that such a delicate and complicated organism, you do a little thing and you can upset the most complicated organism that we know of in the universe is us. The idea that you could come up with a technique to balance those forces and not be a danger to yourself psychologically is crazy. And we see this with the craziness that comes from this stuff. Of course, but if something outside guides it, that's the only way. The Lord's guiding it. And so you see this in Kundalini again, to bring it up again. You just look at it online. Look at it online. Bone marrow issues, heart issues, erectile dysfunction, thyroid, permanent problems of people that do this. Not to mention the deep psychological inflation and demonic possession through that. These things are incredibly dangerous, but luckily the Lord is here to guide us. And is the only way. Those that came before me are thieves and robbers. I'll guide your practice. I'll guide what you do. And again, I've talked about a bit of this already, is that there's all sorts of sin and demons in your unconscious and bad inclinations. The breathing determined by the ego with no Christian moral purification or grace actually breathing. It's just going to lift up all these sinful inclinations and you'll be possessed by them. As Jung understood, is that what we used to see properly externally has become complexes, demons. These things that are in the psychological body, quote unquote. You don't see them in normal practical life, but if you start doing these Eastern practices, you'll lift them up and you'll start seeing them. That's why you need the Lord. That's why he came. That's why he came. It's the broad way, not the narrow way. And so you've got two different problems there. Again, one being the wings of Icarus or the wings of the bat. So there's no use coming in saying, oh, we do purification too. No. You're a humanist technology, unfortunately. But you can just learn to follow the Lord. There's no perennial, we're not worshiping the same God. He incarnated. You're out of step with him. Doesn't mean there's not truths in your religions. A lot of even stuff was sent from him. But ultimately they're not, from a previous time. And so he's come now. It's the only way, only healthy way. Their way, even in that way of sobriety that they have, is the way of depersonalization. It's the depersoning, the removal of the human. No, the human is made divine. Lord again said, I came so you could have life abundantly, not to have it annihilated and for you to dwell in nirvana without care and without emotion. But yeah, I've talked about most of that stuff already. But Christian breathing is not controlled by you, the ego, but a grace and collaboration with the Lord each time it happens. It's controlled by a loving volition beyond you. Again, we'll get into this. Again, this is an intermediate thing for people that are already involved in this stuff deeply. So you'll see these things for yourself. This is just a helpful preparation for people that are already involved in this stuff. And so a loving volition beyond you. You can only realize this through doing the preparations as I've stated and as Valentin Tomberg talks about. But let's do some further preparation on that subject of preparation before we get into the specifics of what I'm talking about here. So, again, we have to hit this stuff home again. There's no technique that can bring this about of its own steam. No technique which is able to help us without, speaking of making us pass from the surface world to the depth world, other than a purely moral act. Sacrificium intellectus. Sacrifice of the intellect to conscience, which authentic conscience, as I've talked about before, is an Angeloi. It's the recognition once and for all of the primacy of moral logic, its superiority to formal logic of the intellect that has come since Greek times, which affects the passage from the state of reasoning to that of intuition, as we've talked about before. Guidance from the divine is what intuition is. No exercise whatever for the concentration of attention or for the suppression of mental activity will alone help you to attain intuition. It's also collaborative. There's clues here when it says alone, but it's also collaborative. Even if you do it, that's why it's called concentration without effort. Again, I've gone through what these practices are in previous lectures. Look it up on the front page of my YouTube, where it says the practices of initiation or the practices of Christian mysticism. And so no breathing exercise or mental technique of itself will be of any use here. This is citations from Valentin. But I know this all from direct experience. Because in order to attain an aim higher than intelligence in the body, one has to make use of means which are also higher than intelligence as the body, the spirit. It's outside of you. You don't. The words here are deceiving. Make use of. You're not using. It's this thing throughout the process. You have to get through your thick head, unfortunately, because you'll keep having a subconscious desire to think you can bring things about in the practice. But you'll have to again and again and again learn that it's collaborative and grace, effort and grace. That's why it's called concentration without effort, passive and active. That which is spiritual is achieved only by spiritual means, and these comprise no technique beyond the purely moral act and endeavor. Without the three Christian oaths, this stuff doesn't work. It opens you to grace. Those three oaths do, where breath unites with divine breath. And there are practices related to those three oaths. You don't do it of your own volition, but in collaboration. What this means is you can't bring about initiation under your own power. Your effort only comes halfway, is a good way of putting it. Again, people already doing the practice. And I should even, when I say practice, it's quote unquote, it's art. It's rhythm. Practice is very, that is probably a Latin word. And the Latins were very technical. The Greeks became very technical. So you got to be careful calling it praxis, procedure that brings about an efficient outcome. No. Not with divine things. Again, a big reason why, or one of the reasons why Christ came was to fix that Greek folk, angelic, Angeloi technical being, because it was imperfect. The Heraclitean logos is based on war. It needed to be fixed. That's why these things become antithetical, logic gates and hard idea and proposition idea superstructure, which has got us to where we are in the West. The solution isn't the East, because they technicalized in a different way. That's the danger of this stuff. You think you can just put it in place to fix the meaning crisis? No. Aldous Huxley tried this stuff. He said, oh, anything's better than modernity. He started dosing on DMT, another technology. Burned himself out before he left his 30s and was a husk of a man, completely cut off from any divine thing by doing that with mescaline. Anything's better than modernity. Demon possession is not better than a death of meaning. No. So it's a great opportunity where we are. It's also a great opportunity for the enemy at the same time. There are dangers to this, and they come from the East. And so the rebirth from water and spirit, which the Master, the Lord, indicates to Nicodemus, is a reestablishment of the state of consciousness prior to the fall. That's what this is all about, where the spirit and divine breath, and where this breath was reflected, followed by virginal nature. What does that mean? Breath reflected, collaborating. But you have to be virginal nature for that to be possible. You have to purify yourself to become Mary. Let it be with me according to your word, Lord. Mary says. Well, Mary says that. I'm pretty sure. She does. Let it be with me according to your word. Don't forget your mother, the mother. Not just the Jesus prayer, but as Saint Seraphim of Sarov says, even half the day do with the breathing. Mother Mary, Mother of God, save us, save us. Mother Mary, Mother of God, save us, save us. The mother has to help you too, because virginal nature, you have to reach a virginal nature to be able to follow to have him breathe for you is another way of putting it. This is Christian yoga. And be very careful not to understand what I'm saying there. No way does that mean we're using any kind of Eastern practice. It just means people understand yoga to mean breathing and mental. No, we're saying we don't need anything from them. The monastics never have. We have grace in our tradition. Christ came for that, to teach us the true way. We just don't have the exact, the words to describe. And when you go through the process, you realize, oh, that's what the monastic's talking about there. Like the heart, looking at the heart, staring at the heart from the Filioquia. I'm not saying look at the physical heart. They're saying bring your attention to the emotive zone, the heart. You could even probably say that in the non-modern age that where we feel emotion now, we tend to locate it, or it feels like it's located with here somewhere. It's probably for them, it felt like it was here. So modernity has moved things around based on how we're raised and taught things as we emerge into consciousness from childhood. So it's not only we look at, it's symbolic. Well, that was probably the same place for them. But now the emotive zone feels like it's around here somewhere. And actually, as you proceed in these practices, in the depths of your meditative prayers, Christian meditative prayers, you sense all these things to be very close together. They begin to be very close together anyway. But that's for you to discover as you go through the process. But let it be with me according to your word. That's our yoga. Again, that's their word. Like I'm just saying that they don't have anything that we don't have. We don't have it. It's all we know how to collaborate with. We don't need to take anything from them. Doesn't mean you can't study them and understand things from them, but you don't take any practices from them. For instance, one thing is that the meditative, their feet are off the ground. Body position matters. If you take your feet off the ground, what's that like? That's Luciferian. Why? Because it's about the lust for freedom of environment and everything. That's not us. Christ is about having the kingdom of heaven on earth with you, acting through you, saving. You don't abandon the world. It's also delusional. It can be delusional. It might be a kind of curative that helped people, like Buddhism, for instance, to feel better in the state of torture that was existence before Christ. But you can see why having the feet off the ground. Oh, I see. Your feet aren't on the earth. So when we're doing these things, you're seated in a chair in an active, passive state. Seated, feet on the ground. It's also European. Look at it all, our tradition, our symbols in the tarot deck. Seated in a throne. That's what we do. For good reason. Christianity is reality. It's the ground of reality. Christ is the ground of reality. And so the principle of grace underlies earthly life as well as spiritual life. It is wholly below and above, ruled by the laws of obedience, poverty, and chastity. Obedience to what? Revelatory law, solar law. That's the whole purpose of beginning to follow the Ten Commandments. They've been revealed in Revelation. Beatitudes, and these things have been revealed. That rivets the will. Going through that turns the will into 5 wounds. And what does that mean when the will becomes 5 wounds? They become senses. The will that was formerly trying to lust after things in the world and claw things from the world become senses in the depth of practice to receive revelatory action, which is what this is. It is divine instinct. You can only have divine instinct by purifying your 4 limbs. Your 5 wounds, the wound of the heart, because you are egoic and don't love everything. The wounds of the hands, because you want to grasp and take at the expense of others and keep and hold on to. The wounds of the feet, you want to advance and hold the position hierarchically of where you are at the expense of others. And those things all become eventually wounds through obedience. And they become senses. So you see what happens with the fall. And that's what we're born into. And so what's a good metaphor to understand grace? And this connects with the practices, because we're going to talk about how we can do things, repetitively, practices, to help us understand this. But the lungs know that it is necessary to breathe, and they obey. We can think about the belly knows. There's an automatic rhythm to it that you can learn from. It's already following some sort of grace-like thing, you could call. Something in the vital body that controls the speed of the breath that you don't need to do anything with. So you can learn a lot from observing your own breathing. The lungs or the belly knows that you are in want, and it breathes in. They love purity, and they breathe out. We must be like the lungs in the passive active state of concentration without effort. Again, we're going to be doing a lot of observing of the belly breathing. The very process of breathing teaches the law of obedience, poverty, and chastity. It's a lesson by analogy in grace. And so that's why it's such an important part. That's why it's connected to the Jesus prayer. So we can learn that, how to find that middle space, that where we're conscious, attending, but we're not actually moving something. It's a volition beyond us after we've purified ourselves. That breathing in the reality, the actuality where grace determines the speed of your breathing is a way of putting it. And this is the mystery of the breath. I'm talking about mysteries. I've tried to be as... you got to be careful. You don't want to be too hit them over the head with it. Again, you can read Valentin Tomberg for a more symbolic approach to this. But I think we're in a time, and I've asked for guidance on this, where you have to speak more openly about what's going on and how it works, help people to do it. This is breathing in grace, conscious breathing in the reality of grace, is Christian Hatha yoga. Again, we're not taking anything from them. It's saying that this is how it's done here. You don't have a technology, just because so people understand that. You don't need that. We've got this already. That's a technique, and a dangerous technique in the end. It's the vertical breathing of prayer and benediction. In other words, one opens oneself to grace and one receives it. And that's all we are figuring out how to do in the end. How to be that passive active, which the seated position represents. We don't do the cross-legged position, which is Luciferic. Now, a quote that will help you sort of poetically in the depth of your practice, perhaps notice some things about how grace works. And I'll talk more about grace in further lectures. Again, this is relevant for people that are sort of have started the practice anyway, or at an intermediate stage of it, but this should help. And this only happens in the depth of your morning prayer practice, in your meditations, your Christian meditations. When he moves and we move with him, then we are in concord with the Master and his grace. When he brings deep silence and we are silent with him, then the silence is the silence of the Master. When he unceasingly alternates movement and rest, go on with him unceasingly of movement and silence and rest. When he rises and falls with inhaling and exhaling, rise and fall with him. When the sacred heart of the Master still preserves calm, movement before the right time is the fault of softness. When the sacred heart of the Master has already moved, the movement that follows afterwards, in order to correspond with it, is a fault of rigidity. As soon as the sacred heart of the Master is stirring, one must immediately follow instinctually, heartedly. This movement is in the accord with the time, and this is coming into concord with his movement in serious play, in concentration without effort, in collaboration with the Master, in this grace without effort. Sorry, grace with effort. Are we the emissary and herald of the Master? The Lord. So the Master is? The Master is something that French people more call the Lord. The Lord, of course, in England is more appropriate, but that master emissary is what we're trying to work out. The Lord. Again, people might not like the word master in English, but he is the master. He's God. He's your loving Father that wants you to be the best you that you can be. He knows your ultimate potentiality. So that's all the master is. It's the French word for the Lord. Contact with the Angeloi. Advancing in the practice, preparation with Christ in the wilderness. I think you're getting what we're sort of talking about here. But in the what is the analogy of Christ for how, in the Gospels, for how Angeloi can approach? I might just go to the bathroom very quickly, but I'll leave this slide up here. You can have a read of it. Or maybe you might prefer to watch nature. You can always pause it if you want to read these slides, and they're available in the Discord, in the fellowship. But I'll just put the nature on for you to have a look at while I go to the bathroom, and we'll continue here. Hey. Thanks for your patience, beloved friends. Back we go. So, what is an Angeloi? Well, Angeloi is a word in the Greek is a Greek word, and we should use Greek because people get a sense of authority from that because it's from an old text. Whereas if you just say angel, people just start going new agey, new age, new age. Angeloi. And the Gospels were written in Greek, so we should use the Greek words. Anyway, when it comes to them, I think. There is something to Greek. I used to think it was only, it's just because it's alien to the West. And there is a sense of orthodoxy. Some of the reason why people enjoy orthodoxy too is they start hearing the Russian and they go, it's like the Latin Mass. Oh, it's something I don't know. There's a mystery to it. But I think there actually is something to Greek or ancient Greek or Chionic or I can't pronounce it right, Chionic or Chionic Greek, because the Gospels were written in it. So there's something about that language that holds in the depths. That also might be because in esoteric Christianity, we understand that the Greek Angeloi, folk Angeloi, became the exoteric Christian Archangeloi. That's what happened and spread throughout Europe. So it is in the depths of us as it became an archai, actually. When an archai is like the spirit of the times. Sorry, the spirit of the epoch is a way to put it. And you can see that in how Greek metaphysics and various things are all over Europe. And so there is a sense that in the depths of every psyche of everyone, there is some Greek, the Greek sounds, the Greek look, the look of the Greek words. There's a mystique to it that's actually authentic because there's a connection with a old Angeloi. But again, that's deep. That's deep angelology that we don't need to go into today. So why can't they just approach you, the Angeloi? Because we haven't gone into the wilderness yet. We haven't gone through our exodus yet. Just put my air conditioning on here, on me. Because we haven't gone to the wilderness yet. We haven't gone to the wilderness yet. We haven't gone into our exodus. Maybe that's a bit too much on my face. Move that over a little bit. We haven't gone through our exodus yet. What does that mean? Well, the Gospels, I think it's Matthew's Gospel, with the temptations of the Christ, are our understanding of this. And why? Because you have to overcome the temptations first. Why? Because the space that you are, and underneath the space that you are, the conscious space that you are, and again, your cognition reaches out from you. You're not just your physical body. You're touching everything you're attending and observing when you're walking around in the world. You are a here, there being, which is what Heidegger's talking about. Here, yonder, here, there being. An openness. All these objects you look at are pre-disclosed in advance. You already know what they are. That tells you that you are an organism that's larger than yourself. So you're not in your body, you're out in the world. Also, cognitive scientists talk about this and call it extended cognition. And also, your organism can go even further as distributed cognition. Again, these are just sign-tarred words, or philosophers trying to LARP as scientists anyway by calling it cognitive science. But the tradition knows what this stuff is. The tradition knows that. But anyway, the point is, why can't angels approach that space that you are? Because it has to be purified. Because what generates that space that you are, who you are, is the will to power, the slithering calculation that has come from heredity and evolution. Your sin makes that space what it is. Your goals or your lusts related to what you're trying to bring about in the world. And again, this is why I call what Peterson's self-authoring shit-lib demonology. Because you're just, it's again, it's another sort of broad way to walk around in life where you're lifting up whatever mimetic parasite has entered you. And so that's why the angels can't approach you. They can't breathe in your environment until you've passed temptation. And so we see this in the Gospels with the three Angeloi, the Angeloi of charity, the Angeloi of poverty, and the Angeloi of obedience, which are related to the three temptations. Now, let me look. Yeah, so why else? Okay, because that grinding, calculative combat, that will to power that generates your existential self, the things you want, your goals, your past, and the people that have wounded you and the sins that you've undertaken make the world present to you as it does. So that's all in the subconscious, and it needs to be cleaned. So it's not just in the conscious, and it makes the conscious world look like it does to you. So in that air, the angel can't breathe. That's one thing. The darker parts of your inclinations, demon and sin, and your arbitrariness. The lack of the good in you also. And their need for more breath. So it's not just about those things, but those things need to be cleared first before they can breathe through you. And so before the demons have to leave you first, and you see this in your practice, thoughts arise to distract and stop us from continuing with our Christian meditation, with our prayer in the practice. And we'll talk about how the practice is united and connected with the breath in the coming slides, but we have to get to it through these preparations to show how it's in the gospel. And so, what's I saying? In the depth of your practice, in every morning you're doing this practice and these deep Christian meditations and prayer in the morning, and hopefully you will eventually go up to an hour, because the more time, the better, because it usually happens like halfway in. These things occur or late in the practice, so work your way up slowly. And so in the depths of that practice is you going into poverty. It is concentration without effort, as we've talked about many times. And again, go to my lectures on that practice for how to do it. In the depths of that is poverty. It's the beginning of the sacrifice of the intellect to conscience, as we talked about earlier. That's going into the wilderness like Christ did. Of course, you do it in many other ways, with fasting and stopping sinning and various things, but you practice this every morning, and every morning thoughts will come up to distract you, and you will be distracted. Even I am. That's the point, though. You come back and you know the distraction. Neutral, no, and go back to what you're supposed to be attending and praying. It'll lead you away, and that's passing these temptations in a slow way with the collaboration from outside you and the washing of your feet from beings that are larger than you, from Christ and the Lord. Will those demons leave for a time, as the gospel says, for a time. And what happens after they leave and you pass them? The Angeloi can approach. But they need other things too. But you'll see that occurs. They come with gifts of grace. We must withdraw from the gods of existence to the one God of essence. And that's what we're doing every morning. And we'll outline the practices that are to do with that and how to do it. Withdraw into the wilderness allows the angels to breathe in and through you. So first you're passing and purifying and passing the temptation. Then it can be possible to receive this grace. And it's through the sacrifice of the intellect doing this practice every morning. Our experience of this, of Christ's temptation in the wilderness, and thoughts and desires and distractions, not just thoughts, but also desires to stop, whatever it might be. All these things can be demons that we have to pass. I want to check the alarm. I want to do this. I want to do that. Even when it's not a proposition that's sent to us. And really, as a blanket, you should just know every thought. Think a gentle, neutral no, and go back to what you're supposed to be attending in your head. Everything, even stuff. The demons will send things that are also the spirit of modernity and the spirit of the times to distract you. They'll say things that seem true in isolation. Oh, this is just psychological, or it's the critical spirit of modernity, right? But when you consider it with the total weight of evidence, once you've stopped your practice, you go, no, that doesn't make sense. I've got an epistemic principle here. We know what verifies the truth from using that. We're not fools in a holistic way, and it won't make sense. But all these diabolical criticisms might make sense in an isolated case, right? But when you see the whole domain of truth, it doesn't make sense, and the criticism's invalid. But it tries to get you in the moment. And so really you blanket deny any thought that comes up anyway. Now's not the time for philosophizing. Now's the time for moving towards silence. So your space can be empty, so the Lord can approach you. But that's what will happen. These thoughts will come up. And so, they'll get you. They still get me. And you go, oh, and then you'll realize, and again, you'll then know it and go back to attending what you're supposed to attend. And so just blanket know everything, even if you agree with it, and go back to what you're attending. That you can think about these things later, not in your practice, right? And you'll do it again and again and again, but you'll remember that. So now we know that. What else allows the angel to breathe? Let's understand what breath is for an Angeloi. It's about vertical distance. You know how we were talking about vertical and horizontal? We experience the distance in space. The angels are distance from us vertically, morally, spiritual space. What does that mean? It means that, considering this analogy and how we experience their breath, what is distance for an Angeloi? 300 miles for us is 300 changes in breath from inhalation to exhalation for them. They're breathing, not your breathing, though. They're breathing. What is movement for them? Movement for you is as a change in respiration from regular rhythmic respiration, which we'll become very used to attending, is for Angeloi. What does that mean? Not you changing respiration, them changing your respiration and the depths of your concentration without effort practice of an hour. We will talk more about that, of course. What allows this in the next slide. That's key. Again, this is only going to make sense for people. And again, this is not stuff that's just me, though I've experienced all of this and gone through it and know how to do it. It's also backed up by Valentin Tomberg, though he talks about it more mysteriously than we are. And he didn't have the ability to do that. We do today because of the internet and because I can't be stopped by a publisher. Whereas someone might not have published his very important book if he wasn't more careful about how he put it. But you'll see it very clearly, and a lot of this stuff is cited from him, but also with very important additions from me. And so that's how it works. That's how the Angeloi approach after you've passed the temptation. And we'll go into what those temptations are in this next part we see over to the right. And so after the temptations are overcome, what do the different Angeloi grant you? Sort of like the Magi after the temptation, they come with gifts. After the temptation, the Angeloi come with gifts of like kind, and this happens in the depths of your practice. Again, it's intermediate. It'll take time, patience, and temperance, people. Don't lust after any of this or any spiritual experience. Do, as Yoda said, do, don't try. Just do. So And I've talked about that many times, and I talk about that in the other streams on the practices. So let's talk about the first temptation. The temptation to experiment with God, to force God to prove himself as power. What is this? Cast yourself from the pinnacle of the temple, says the devil to the Lord. So the angels will rescue you to prove it. What is this? What are you facing compared to Christ in that scenario? It's a being in emptiness, feeling no love from the Father or any spiritual experience. That's the state that you are in, comparable to Christ here, that tempts you to possibly do this. And of course, Christ says, you shall not tempt the Lord your God. I think it is written. That means he is the principle. What does it mean? What's the significance of this? It's that he's the principle of love first, not power. Not power. Love him first, and he reveals himself. Purify yourself first, and he reveals himself. He doesn't enslave you through fear of his power. That's how the devil works. And other religions, which we're not going to talk about, that are related to power gods. Of course, Christ is ultimately intervenes, only in collaboration with us, though. You have to pray for it. He doesn't breach our freedom. It's not about power. It's about free love of each other between Father and Son. God is the divine person who loves you. It threatens freedom for him to force himself on the world through power. We would not be beings he loved otherwise. We'd just be tools to extend him, loving and refusing to test. This is also in the Lord's Prayer, this pinnacle of the temple. And it's justified. What do we say? Lead us not into temptation, deliver us from evil. It's saying, we won't tempt you, Lord, to force you to reveal yourself power if you don't tempt us to desire a proof like that. That's how it's justified. I've talked about that in the deep meaning of the Lord's Prayer, which you can go to my stream on that, my live lecture on the deep meaning of the Lord's Prayer. It's on the front page of the YouTube, but I go into the depth. These are connected. The temptations that are talked about in the Lord's Prayer and the temptations of Christ in the wilderness. It's connected to this. These are very complex, these temptations. They're archetypal. They are deep in your psyche as well. And so they can deeply be looked into. But what does that mean more? So loving and refusing to test. A test implies the wrong attitude, and a worship of power is proof. After loving, truth is revealed. And he will reveal himself to you. You just have to dissolve yourself first. You have to de-egoize. Because what Lucifer's right next to you. Satan's right next to you. Lucifer is part of the forces of the ego itself. He's related to what we are. So you have to go through the moral development of overcoming that first. Because you're the prodigal son. The prodigal son is not interfered with by the father. He has to come back of his own accord first. Then the father will grant him resources, the life, the second wine. You have to come back freely. Not demand he prove himself through power. Show me first. That's very the people that Austrian painter didn't like. That's what they do. No, he's the God of love. And so what's the Angeloi of chastity is what comes. We're chaste. Chastity is also related to loving properly. It's related to it's loving rightly, not loving world, not loving power, but loving him. Aiming properly what you love is related to chastity. And what's the gift the Angeloi brings after you overcome that? Breath is the gift, which is the breath of incense, which is, again, it's connected to the Magi, the gifts of the Magi, the breath of incense from the throne of God. And again, this can be experienced in the practice and is experienced in the practice and the depths of mystical meditation and contemplation of God. And I speak from direct experience. It's felt as a love and a breeze of loving serenity, felt behind the eyes primarily, but it can be the whole being that you are. Incense is a felt love and life. You could probably call it a virginal Zoe as well. A felt love and life is a breath of serenity, cool like water. Quicksilver is a word that other people have used, but I'm saying here from my experience, cool like water, felt behind the eyes. And that's where, again, the zone of silence is, as we've talked about before. Behind the eyes and forehead, a spiritual touch is, but also the whole body. Cool, loving serenity is the breath of incense from the throne of God. And that's the phenomenology of it. Again, these are spoken of as metaphors, but I'm giving you the phenomenology with them. And it's a great gift. Again, you have to you don't want to seek this stuff. You want to, it's to help you, if you experience, to know what it is. That's all this is. Because we don't want to be spiritual drunkards. We need to know what's going on. That's the whole point of Hermetic philosophy. It's the whole point of Christian Hermeticism, Christian mysticism. If you're just seeking mystical experience and not to understand what's going on, then you end up a drunkard. So that's the purpose of all this. And in Christian esotericism, as they call it. Although that word has been made a dirty word. So take it, by various people that run channels on apologetics. Which, it's important, actually. It is also important that they do that, because there's a lot of bad things that are put under that word. So anyway, moving on. The temptation of being famished. It's being in a state of desirous in the wilderness compared to Christ, as he also was. And he refuses to will stones into bread, to magically transform stones into bread. Again, these are very complicated and deep archetypal temptations that are at the ground of what the human being is, and help us to understand that. And this one is actually, it's related to magic. It's in the depths of what it is. It's also related to the world of capital. Capital is a kind of magic. To desire capital as an end is to desire to turn stones into bread. If you really meditate on that, you'll see what's going on, and how that's related to will to power, but also how that's related to magic, is that you're not actually interacting concretely with things. You just want this magical power, which is sort of what capital is. You just use it. I can summon this and summon that and summon that. It's Faustian magic, connected to Faustian magic anyway. But let's go into it. Understanding that. He refuses, and the demon left him for a time, and the Angeloi of poverty could approach him with the gift of bread. There is also a deep down desire in us. There's a deep down desire in us to be free of all physical environmental needs and to have them magically provided for us. A lot of people go into this kind of practice. You've got that deep down in you, but you have to accept you're part of the world and in your environment. The Eastern practices are that sort of escape. You're part of the world and here to save it. You will go away for a time into the wilderness, but you'll come back and be threaded back in. You're not to be this self-sustained. I mean, he will sustain you, but you're here to help in the mission, to help other people. Or else it is just Luciferic. It's another kind of egoism. But you can see how that wanting to be free of physical environment is connected to capital. You want independence. You want independence, do you? Okay. Full independence. And that's what being rich would give you. Magical independence. Yeah, of course, we need to use these things in the modern world. That's fine. That's what completely understand that, but they're dangerous seductions at the same time. And you really have to work very hard to remove that as as a deep need and goal to have this magic, this capital, this stored magic in your bank account. And honestly, so many Christians are, a lot of it is actually they're living a pagan life connected with these dangerous things that end up provoking them. So it's something to definitely be wary of. And what helps you overcome this? Of course, it's the sacrifice of the intellect. It's also tied up with, because it's the angel of poverty that comes after it, it's also dissolving the intellect and its desires. It's this morning practice we're doing is helping with that. Rejecting this temptation to calculate and bring something about and use this magic. Now, so what's the gift that comes from the angel of poverty? Well, you're leaving that capitalistic will to power context where it is the king, and in your intellectual calculation too, the slithering to try bring about more capital. And again, you need resources. I understand that, but you over rely on this serpentine calculation. But what's the gift that comes from poverty? It's the Lord's word, or his way. Way, truth, and life. Word and way. The divine word become food. That's also divine instinct and revelatory communication. This is what brings you into his context, rather than the magic of capital, which turns stones into bread. It's the development of these faculties by withdrawing from the world and going into the wilderness and an exodus from the gods of existence to discover the God of essence. So he can give you bread, spiritual bread, of course, by having his word, but his word in and with you to show you what to do. So you can ask him questions and receive an intuition answer, which is what becomes available more and more if you do this. That's you entering his divine context. And your bread is all then provided by him. And he will provide for you. But you have to become used to, as you develop and grow in faith, as he grants you faith as a real divine energy, as he grants you hope, which is him. Hope is access to him, access to providence. That's what hope is. The principle of hope. And love, which is charity, faith, hope, and charity. You pray for those things. Don't just practice them, pray for them. Because we don't want to do our Christianity like a Kantian or Islamic duty where it's top down and forced by the ego, where it's, I must do this. And you're sort of like whipping your being. Or it's enforced by society like it is in the caliphate. No. It's from awakening Christ within, or what the Greeks called sophrosin, which means you just feel like doing the good. You are impelled to do the good. You're impelled to do the good. From within, you want to do it. So that's what this whole process is about, is leaving that will to power. So naturally, and you pray for it. Pray for charity. Pray for love. Lord, grant me love for you, for the angelic hierarchies, for the saints, for nature, virginal nature, not the world, nature, for our fellow man. These are things and energies that can be granted to you. And so that's the slow leaving of this context, of that desire to have power over everything of the world, the magic. And it's deep down in the psyche, this desire to be free of the environment, to have magic, have our dark will fulfilled. Past this temptation, and Christ provides for you following his way and word, again, as divine instinct, as intuition, not just as following, reading the text. Of course, you do that over and over and over again, memorize, because it will imbue into you. But it's as a fact of experience. Christ is available cosmically. He's here, alive, right now. He's not a historical figure. He's God. Yeah. And we've forgotten that. Of course, he's not invisible man over there. He's still a mystery, but through this process, he becomes a communication between you and him. Again, completely internally verified. Again, we have an epistemic principle, a truth criterion, which I have a lecture on, the truth criterion. This is, we're very careful about spiritual deception. So go to that lecture and watch. It's a fact. It becomes a fact of your experience, an undeniable fact, more powerful than any scientific evidence, anything like that. Rationality, more powerful, far more powerful. What the Greeks called episteme. So, he also provides you with actual food too. It might not be the resources that your low desires want, but it'll be what you need and at the right time. So it's not just a spiritual food. And part of the spiritual food is also the way. So he'll show you what to do or intimate what to do or through forces. And the archetype of this communication is in the Gospels with what the shepherds of Bethlehem are shown. They're given direct words as guidance and teaching, which happens, but that can be more rare. It's easier because in that case where you can be told a proposition, or you can do it through inspiration, which is actually quite difficult to do and learn how to do. And it's an intermediate thing. I'll talk about it some other time, which is related to your guardian angel. But in terms of, I'm talking about receiving words here and direct answers to questions. Again, we'll talk about these at different time, but the archetype of that is the shepherds of Bethlehem, but also the Magi. What are they guided by? The star. Forces. You're guided by forces and intuition, which is nothing. It's not women's intuition or anything like that. Nothing you have any access to. It takes a lot of purification and practice to have it. It's the Lord. It's connected with grace. Also the Holy Spirit. Okay. So moving on from that, you're entering his holy context and world by doing that. And I talk about this more too in where do I talk about that? I talk about that in Christ's Miracles, I think, the lecture on Christ's Miracles. This temptation. And so the next temptation, again, this is related to what you'll also experience in practice. These gifts will come to you. Part of his word and way is also grace and movement. Divine instinct is the grace we're talking about with the breath. That's part of it. So it's communication, but also it's a revelatory action. Revelatory action is a movement. It's showing you the ideal of movement. And even way further, you'll notice throughout the practice, you will go through periods of spiritual development where it's a contraction and a death because you have to die and to live, right? And so in this mystical process, it doesn't happen all at once. Christ can do that, and he does that with Lazarus. He's dead completely for 3 days and then completely resurrected. With us, it happens slowly. It's a contraction and expansion, contraction, expansion. And so in a contraction, you're not experiencing grace. You're also experiencing what it's like without it. And so you might go to the gym or something like that. And you'll notice you have a weakening of the will because the low will needs to be dissolved and first. And that's actually him very close to you. When you're feeling a low of will in this practice, that's the Lord working on you and washing your feet. Because you're low and sinful, it feels like oppression. And St. John of the Cross talks very clearly about this. And you'll notice the difference between you'll notice that what happens before you have a contraction is in the depth of a practice, you'll notice the sorrow, joy, emotiveness, and the deep silence like a pillar entering your whole sense body. It's like a weight of silence. And you're also released from you're released from the thoughts and such, right? The demons. It happens after passing the temptations, but an Angeloi will enter you or approach, and they'll feel like that, like a pillar entering your whole body, a pillar of silence and depth. And then the emergence of the fire, what is called the fire of Emmaus, which is felt in the heart, in the emotive zone, you feel it. It's felt as sorrow, joy. So after that signifies that a spiritual contraction, you're dying a little bit. He's coming closer to you. And so it's felt as that. Feels like the airport feeling when you leave family. I suppose you could say it feels a bit like that. But these are divine emotiveness. They're not the same as human. And you'll know it's not from you either. Anyway, the point is that after that, so you'll notice that you've got less will and less energy because of the first wine has to go. And then next, you'll notice in the depth of practice, you might have a expansion. That's not a contraction of the second wine. And again, this is all related to grace. That's where I'm getting to with this. There's another way which grace is experienced, because it's not just about the breath, although the breath is something you eventually will experience every day, every morning practice. But the grace within the practice, you'll experience the same thing. There's silence, the depth of silence, but also a sort of deep serenity and loving joy, like I talked about. Now, you'll notice in the day following that, say you go to the gym or something, or you're walking, there's an impulsion. The walking's easier, but it's almost like the ideal is acting in you. And so you can almost relax into that. You can notice that there is a grace acting in you. Again, it's always collaborative. You don't, if you just were to stop, it's a free collaboration. But if you relax your will, the walking continues. You'll notice it when you experience it. But that's part also what grace is. It's not I who lives, but Christ who lives and acts in me. And so grace can be experienced in other movements, revelatory action. Again, it happens that you'll notice it after it's connected with, you'll sense that in the morning, and then you'll see, because it's not always available, because we're developing morally. It's contraction and expansion. But when you are in grace, that's what will happen. And everything will be much easier. And actually, that's why it's important to do these suffering practices, lifting weights, whatever they are. So you notice the difference. So you're learning. It's part of teaching you as well. The Lord's teaching you through these things happening in your practices. Because if you just had grace all the time, there'd be nothing to learn. No development. And so the next temptation, let's talk about the next one. So I hope that was helpful. Again, it's an intermediate thing. It's only for people that are understanding what's going on. So the next temptation that's faced that is comparable to what you will experience is the temptation of being the Superman, king of the world. If you would just worship the serpent and his ideal, his mastery of the world. Now, what you feel here in poverty in the wilderness is I'm lowly. I'm being in lowliness of the nothing rank in the eyes of the world. That's the being you're in. The previous being was being famished for the desires of the world. The one before that was being in emptiness, feeling no love from the Father or spiritual experience. So you're in a state here in this other temptation of being lowly. Christ is tempted by the calculative lust to improve his station through power, or you can say you in this case, improve his station through powers, laws of utility, calculation, war, to worship worldly power, which is part of the ground of the ego, which is, as we've said, is connected to Lucifer. And what does the devil do? He offers him the world. If you just worship me. And what happens when this is passed? Oh, in the previous temptation, did I say what the devil... Turn these stones into bread. That's what the devil says. there's an interesting thing here as well, before I go into that rest of that temptation, is that in Greek, in the Bible, there's two different words used to describe. It shows you that which person he's dealing with. In this case, it's Lucifer, I think. Because in the Greek, they use daimon. Actually, I won't go into that. I'll talk about that at some other time. But it's just a quote in the Bible that helps you see the difference between Lucifer and Satan. And it's shown in the use of the word when Satan's used, and when Satan is used, it's Satan. When daimon is used, it's Lucifer. Demon is used. Now, okay, so after this temptation's passed, and you can see in this your will to power is that, you'll think in your practice, you'll think, I don't have time. I won't be able to do my goals. I won't be able to do this or that. You're worshiping the world. God will give you a mission when you go through this. It'll be far more better life once you've gone into the wilderness than what you had before. It won't be what you expect. If you had told me what I'd now be doing before I went through this deep mystical process, I wouldn't have done it. But I would be wrong. I would have been wrong, because there's no better gift in life. But it would have scared the sinful me, and his glorious plan for you would scare you. You can't know the future. It has to be unfolded and developed, the glory he plans for you. So, what angel comes to you after this? It's the angel of obedience. And what is that? It's the crown of gold. The crown of gold. What is that? Divine wisdom, the kingdom of God revealed. What does that mean in terms of mystical experience? What happens is, through this rejection of these temptations, the slow obedience, and it takes a long, long time, is that the influence of the psychological body, the 12 archetypes, which are related actually to astrology, the 12 astrological influences, the archetypes that Jung dealt with in the unconscious, they're cut off, and the worldliness is cut off from you. The provokings of the world doesn't any longer have the power it had over you. That's what perfection is. That's what, again, this is a long process. But I can tell you from direct experience, it happens. It's not something I've completed completely. It's perfect union with God is perfection. But I can tell you, these things are cut off. You're the hanged man, as the hanged man shows. The hanged man card in the tarot has 2 trees, right? And it makes up the branches that are cut off. There's 12 of them, 12 archetypes, 12. And he's hung upside down. He's Abraham. He has the divine gravity, the divine call. The divine instinct guides him now and protects him from, and it's cut him off from these branches of the tree of the psychological body, which is memory. And so you want to be the hanged man. Going into the wilderness is becoming the hanged man over time. But you have to reject these temptations of the Superman, to be the Superman. And the whole world of Twitter and the right-wing scene, all that, are all governed by will to power. So many Christians are actually, their God is the will to power, even though they walk around saying they're Catholics or whatever. It's not all Catholics, of course, but a lot of these people, you worship him. You worship the devil, actually, even though you might get some healings, and Christ is trying to help you through the sacraments, but you have to do more to disclose these faculties and be guided by them instead of this low power laws of utility, calculation, and war, like I talked about before. So what does it mean? You're crowned over worldliness and can no longer be provoked. Well, again, it's a perfection over time. So it's a less and less and less and less and less and less and less. It's a mastery in collaboration with divine instinct, because you know and are known by the heavenly kingdom. It's also the senses of that. You begin to be able to see, like someone like Rudolf Steiner and Valentin Tomberg, into the essence of things. You can deeply meditate on things and have answers provided to you of their essence through intuition, through the development of sympathetic, as we'll talk more about, as philosopher Henry Bergson talks about. The crown of mastery. It is the kingdom of heaven that is now in and with you. You now actually interact with spiritual beings using the faculties we've talked about before. This is also related to initiation, right? And we talked about this a little bit earlier. If you fail to let go of egoism and worldly desire, you'll be shown a spiritual world by Lucifer. It's what's called the belt of lies. It's you even be given joy at certain times. But it's the demons of the air then. You have to love all. You have to let go of that egoism and the lust for power and worldly desire. If you don't do that again, you'll think you're growing in the spirit. So all these people talk about their remote viewing, astral projection, The demons of the air will come. That's the Eastern practice. That's the Kundalini again. That's what happens if you fail this temptation. Because they are after the Superman in most cases. And anyone who tries to use or develop these practices for the sake of anything worldly, to have some sort of power in the world or anything like that, will ultimately fall to this principle of Lucifer. And they'll think it's authentic, eternal, but it's be the demons of the air. And they'll show you things. They'll also lead you towards possession. There'll be some truths and things. We know that the possessed have certain faculties granted to them. But yeah, that's the opposite of. And you'll feel like you're a master. These people that do these practices, they feel like they walk around as the master. I'm the guru. Here's how you do it, right? And they're deeply deluded and inflated. When all these psychological illnesses that come about that have new labels by psychology are actually what the tradition knows as possession by demons. Happened to Nietzsche as well, by identifying with the will to power, unfortunately, at the end of his life. And he made a great sacrifice so we could understand certain things. It happened to him, that inflation. So only a development of humility, of worship and work keeps you away from inflation like that, where you start seeing yourself as better than other, even though I criticize, certain Christianity, certain parts of Christianity, certain, Protestantism, what it may be, you're not better than anyone else. You have the image and likeness of God. Any development in this area is just a responsibility. It's a crown of thorns. It means then you have a duty to help other people. So it's something, I can use these faculties to make money. No. No. Okay, let's move on to the next slide. I think this one's very important. Okay. Here are the practices that we've been talking about all this time. Practices for preparation to receive the change of breath, of grace, the Lord breathing in and with you. Okay, so how do the simple things that we do that have talked about in previous streams, previous lectures on the practices of this Christian mysticism? Well, I've got here, and again, if you want a copy of these notes, they're in the fellowship Discord, scottmanuel.com/fellowship. But you can just pause it and read, of course. But this explains why we do the practice as well, and why it helps with everything that we've prepared to fill you in on in the last slide. So here's one. A1, learn how to observe and attend the breathing diaphragm movement and not control this breathing with your low will, merely allowing its automatic speed and movement to continue. So you're doing this, and that's before you're even doing the Jesus prayer in line with it. You should just immediately start doing the Jesus prayer in line with it. This is just explaining why. Why do you do it? This is a practice in being with the vital forces governing the breath speed. You're not doing it, are you? It's again, like we said earlier, it's a lesson in grace to be just attending the breath. You have to get used to that, because at first you'll find it hard not to sort of start controlling it. So it's something you have to get used to. Again, you'll do it while you're praying, but that teaches us how, in the basic sense, to just be active yet passive. That's the state we're going to be in later to be able to receive. And so it's no egoic control of your volition, your will, and there are deeper layers of your human being that control the speed of it, of course, but your ego's not interfering with it. And you're getting better at allowing something else to just be active, and you're passive. It's active, passive state. You're active in your attending, and your conscious attending of it, but you're passive and you're not doing anything with it. Of course, you immediately do this with prayer, but I'm just separating them here. Again, it looks like a procedure, but these things end up, it's a collaboration, like I've said before, but it helps us to understand here. So A2, link that automatic breathing movement you're attending with the Jesus prayer. By praying in your head while you're attending the belly breath movement and allowing this automatic in and out to determine the speed of the speaking in your mind of the prayer. Like I said before, Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy upon me, a sinner. I'm breathing out when that's happening. Again, it's sort of a control in that, but when it's your automatic breath, there's no control at all when it's just in your mind. So that's helpful to understand. Again, the Eastern practice is a deep connection with this original breathing, which was in union with God, that we talked about at the start of the lecture. Why? Why do we do this? It changes a conscious mental prayer, like we said earlier, changes that into a prayer unceasing, which is deeper. You can pray unceasingly in the vital and psychological unconscious. When we say vital and psychological body, that is the unconscious. It's memory, but it's not just normal memory as automatic memory. It's a deeper memory. It's as if it is your automatic breathing that is praying, and it is. It becomes that, like we see in the Way of the Pilgrim book, Russian book. Your whole body then begins to pray. You become a being of prayer and worship and contemplation. It's not a technique, but you develop into that being. Your whole being becomes a worship of God, and should be. An executor of God and a contemplator of God. That's what we're after, really. We want to be that. We'll see more information on that executor and contemplator that are at the depths of our being. It's related to the image and likeness of God. The image is the thing above you that's in ultimate contemplation of God, the transcendent self. And you, as the empirical self, are supposed to be the executor. You're in facticity, in actuality. You are to become executor, to participate in the saving mission, whatever that might be. There's a plan for you. And so that's what we're doing. We're linking up. We're doing the Jesus prayer. And also, like we said earlier, the Mary part of it, the Mary from St. Seraphim of Sarov recommends doing that. And also the Lord's Prayer. I think it's important to do that with the breathing as well. And you make it just do it during the day. Drop into it. You unite these things. You're attending whether you're at the gym, wherever it is. A good thing to do at the gym, actually, say you're using the Stairmaster or the treadmill, is that you do your concentration, that effort, and your eyes closed, and then you're doing the Jesus prayer, and you've got earphones in, so just listen to, I don't know, the Filioque or something, or the Saints, so you're not having that silly music from the gym, so you don't have these women in their scantily clothing yoga pants walking past you, distracting you. Your eyes are closed, and you're praying the Jesus prayer. And because you're holding something, your eyes can be closed. Say if you're on the treadmill or on the stair machine or something. It's harder to do when you're lifting weights. But anyway, that's beside the point. We're back to these preparations. So it helps to always be doing this when you have a spare moment. Drop into the Jesus prayer. That's an important part. The most important thing you can do in this whole thing is the concentration without effort, because that's going into the wilderness. Without going into the wilderness, without the Exodus, without this morning poverty practice, it's not going to happen. It's the most important thing that we don't do in Christian life is this prayer. And you link these things together. The concentration without effort links to these two practices in the Jesus prayer. You can start them off separately, but the point is, without that, these things aren't going to awaken. You have to give the Lord an hour a day. That's the most important thing, even before fasting or anything like that, is to just start this. And that helps with everything else. Fasting becomes easier because the desires of the world are lowered. And you're practicing against these temptations of the devil in the morning. That hour gives you a practice. The poverty gives you a practice of these temptations coming to you, because they'll come to you throughout the day. The will to power temptations, three different archetypes of temptations will come to you. This morning, this is your holy hour to learn, to go to the depths. You have to do it. Without this, it won't awaken for you. And this is just what people don't do. It's not just prayer. Of course, you're praying at the same time, doing the Jesus prayer underneath it. But you have to do the attending and the concentration too. Because you have to sacrifice the intellect as well to get beneath the senses. And so anyway, the point is, there's no reason to let your mind idle anyway. Just observe yourself for a while. Observe yourself in a day. All those, you think you're thinking things through, nothing ever comes to, you're just stewing. You're stewing. You're stewing in demons. You're stewing in temptation. You think you're thinking something through, but you're just reliving the things that wounded you, or some person said this and, I can't believe he said this. And, you're not working anything out. It's just running around and around. You might as well drop into there's no point, unless you're actually contemplating some philosophical thing, whatever it might be. You should just be doing the Jesus prayer. You'll feel better. Do the drop into the breath. Attend the belly breathing at the speed of the Jesus prayer. And also, as important, is the Mother Mary, Mother of God. Save us, save us. St. Seraphim of Sarov did that after the halfway point of the day. I'll sort of go between them. I prefer the Jesus prayer, but Mary's as important. You need to have an icon of her. She's the mother. And I just articulated what B1 is. I just explained that the most important thing is that concentration, without which none of this is going to happen. You're not going to receive this very physical, real, concrete grace unless you do that over 3 months. After 3 months of doing it, some stuff's going to happen for you. Start slowly. You could start with 5 minutes, 30 minutes, move up to it. Or you could take the kingdom by violence, as the Lord says. You could go on a retreat and do 3 hours of this a day. And if you are bored or whatever, or you lose focus, fall asleep, as long as you're sitting there 3 hours, take it by violence, right? Because if you do 2 hours or 3 hours, right, it'll feel like it's worn you out. You can't do anything all day. Or there's only other. Not everyone can do this, but there might be some time in your life where you can take 6 months off or something, and take it by violence. This is the other way. There's one way where you slowly build up, and the other way is taking it by violence, where you do that. And you can actually have a little coffee, a bit of coffee in the morning if you wish. It's not really going to make much difference, but it helps a little bit. You can do that, but half a one. I'd have half a one because you don't want to interfere with anything. But point is, you can take it by violence in the sense that make a drastic change. And what happens is, say you're supposed to do an hour, or I do an hour and a half, right? I think that's the ideal time. Gives enough time for these things to happen. But an hour, the Lord says, can you not watch with me for an hour? He's talking to his apostles. He's talking to you in that sense. Can you not watch with me for an hour? So an hour is probably ideal, but an hour, if it's not something's you want to develop more, go up to an hour and a half, because I do an hour and a half. But if you want to make that easier, again, do it for 2 hours. Go on some retreat and do it for 2 hours or 3 hours, right? And then when you come back to an hour, it'll seem like, oh, how easy is that, right? That's what happened to me, is that I would do it for a long time when I was really trying to brute. I didn't really understand what was going on, right? I was doing these prayer practices for 2 hours, 3 hours. And it obviously deeply cuts into your day and you can't really do anything else. But what happened was it helped with these other temptations that would say, oh, this is so long. But yeah, but when you get used to that, coming back to 1 hour and a half, it goes in a flash of an eye. And you'll become used to that. It will go past in the flash of an eye. Anyway, it'll be the most important, eventually becomes the most important and best part of your day, spending time with the Lord anyway. So that's an alternate tip for people that are having trouble just building up to longer and longer practices and just not, you can take it by force if you wish, if you can find the time somehow. But otherwise, slowly build up to it. You can build up to it. Half an hour, I think, is reasonable. But you could start with 15 minutes. If you can do 5 minutes, you can do 15 minutes. Again, remember that when you're doing these things, all the temptations even the temptation of tiredness, just attend the tiredness. All these things, there are demons of lethargy. They're demons of, they'll tell you, oh, how much time has gone. That's a demon. Yeah. It's really a good idea to think about it this way. They're temptations in the wilderness. Oh, how much time's the clock gone? How much time's left? All these little things will come to you, right? To try to distract you. Just the ancients understood. The church fathers understand. They're demons. They're trying to stop you. But you think that's you. It's not. You wanted to sit down and do this practice for an hour, right? The demon's trying to stop you. The world. Oh, I've got to do this. What if I've got this great idea. I've got this great idea for this thing. Oh, that's what I'll do today. I'll do this. Oh, I've got this task I have to perform today. Yeah. It's trying to stop you going towards him. Assume every thought is temptation. When you do this practice, any thought or desire that comes to you, lethargy, any change, not any change, I mean like any desire to stop, any desire to do something else, any thought that appears, just assume. You'll know when if the Lord talks to you, you'll know. There's a motiveness that comes with it. A motiveness that comes with it. So I don't know why that keeps doing that. Okay. So I've already sort of talked about that, but so that's the most important thing to receive grace. You have to have this poverty, this oath of poverty, this withdrawal in the wilderness that you begin in the morning. Really, that will, even before fasting or anything like that, this must become a part of your prayer rule and concentration, not just prayer with concentration, meditation, Christian meditation. Being towards him. He's at the ground of your unconscious. And so A plus B, link A and B. During your morning concentration without effort, at the same time, you also attend the belly and pray the Jesus prayer as you have been doing separately. If you can do all this stuff at the same time, do that straight away. Always be praying and look at icons before you start your concentration without effort practice anyway. It ends up fundamentally prayer anyway. But it's supposed to be with prayer. But again, you can do them separately because you might have trouble doing it all at the same time. So you learn the Jesus prayer and attending the belly separately and then link them together. And so these are the most important preparations to receive grace, to be in the wilderness, to face temptations. So what's occurring here? You're establishing a praying unceasingly rhythm in the unconscious like we've already talked about. You can't pray consciously unceasingly, but you can unconsciously. That's the purpose of the Jesus prayer and the tradition. It's the purpose of the Irish monks rhythmically and memorizing and reciting the Psalms daily. You're preparing yourself to be in the right. Two, what are you doing with all this? These different practices. You're preparing, because by attending the belly, like we talked about with these different things, you're preparing to be in the right passive active state to receive a change in movement. In this whole process, because you're learning to attend things and be present, and that's so important. because the Lord communicates in mysterious ways. You always pay attention. What you'll learn is to pay attention to everything. Pay attention to where birds are in particular, but your whole body, what can happen. Because these senses develop anyway, but any movement, anything, the Lord can communicate in many different ways. So you're developing a general observation for everything because the Lord enters the blood. You need to be careful and watchful. Watchfulness, as talked about by the saints. Watchfulness. Be attentive of what's going on is part of this preparation too. And it could be, as you do it, you'll do that more as you're walking around. You'll be attentive to everything. And what that does, then in your relaxed state, it's a training in being in the right state to receive grace and movement because you're used to knowing what just the normal vital state of the body is. And if there's any change in volition, you'll understand what is and isn't your volition and will. And you'll notice that because you're used to attending things in particularly the breath in its automatism already. So that is a training for it. You can see why theoretically that works. And you're used to maintaining, being conscious and attending things and being in a complete relaxed state. Because you find that even throughout the practice, you'll tense up a little bit in a certain area, but you'll be used to releasing that again and keeping things relaxed as you're doing your attendings. It's a balance. You learn it. It's almost a miraculous know-how. And so theoretically, it's very important for prayer to be vitalized. Like I said earlier, attending the belly while prayer happens helps in that. You are reconnecting parts of the psyche that have been torn apart by modernity. Spirit relinks with physicality. Unconsciously, you are disconnected from the Lord. This is part of reaching out to him and putting yourself in rhythm with him. To receive grace, you need to grow used to collaborating, like I said, collaborating with the unconscious. This process is both awakened more and going to sleep at the same time because the stuff's unconscious, isn't it? When you go to sleep, parts of your being move towards the macrocosm. That's why you dream. Okay, a lot of the time, dream's just subjective, but not all the time. But you're never conscious when it's happening, or it's very rare if you are. So in the practice, we are conscious while those parts of our being separate and move out to the macrocosm in the morning. So we're going to sleep, but we're also waking up more in this practice. I talk about that in the practice as lectures that I've talked about before. You can find on the front page. In dreams, the parts of our being leave us where we are in the physical body. Consciousness is extinguished. You're going to be conscious while that happens now. Well, eventually that becomes possible. Again, you're not dreaming or anything, but it's that's just what happens. Moving towards them. Again, this is complicated stuff. Again, read Valentin Tomberg's Meditations on the Tarot, which is about Christian mystical process. So, but it's true. There's a truth in that. Is that in these deep practices, we're experiencing consciously what people might remember from sleep. But again, anything visual though, if you're thinking visual, what I mean really is parts of your being going away from where you are in physicality, and you're conscious of that. That's where the different faculties come in of spiritual touch, which I've talked about in previous streams. I won't go into them now, and I can't. But I want to talk about a general analogy that Rudolf Steiner has, which is think about your being as 12 hands of a clock. The more you do your morning prayers and practices, and the longer for, over 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, it feels like, say, 8 of the hour hands leave. And only 3 or 2 or even 1 are still there with the physical senses, if that makes sense. Well, it will when you're doing it. So you will feel distance. You'll still have your senses, although they will darken. But that's just an analogy, so you get what's going on, and you'll understand what I'm talking about if you're engaging in these practices. You'll feel like some of the hour hands that of your total human being that you are away or somewhere else, and your will is. That's how it works. So You'll still be here with a certain percentage or a certain amount of your being, you could say. That's just an analogy to think about. So anyway, next slide. But yeah, they are the most important practices to know. And so I've laid the stuff out there. I've laid it out like a technique or a procedure. But like I said earlier, and why I did all that preparation to show you that in the end it's not, because you don't control it all. You're just doing your half of it with all this stuff. You're doing your half of it. It's establishing a rhythm. It's an art and a rhythm, a collaborative know-how is a way of putting it as well. It will only happen as a moral transformation. It's about becoming used to bringing yourself into a state where you can collaborate with his actions within you later. That'll become more and more a reality. It starts something in the depth of your morning prayers that it's possible, an hour in, half an hour in. But what happens is as you spiritually develop, it becomes sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner and sooner. And then even related to conscience, that grace can enter you and your breathing. Again, it's over a long period of time, months, 6 months, year, longer, whatever's relevant for your moral development. And so it's about development. But eventually it happens every day. That's the greatest gift, is that when it eventually happens in every practice, the Lord entering your breathing. But at the start, it'll come first. You'll deal with the temptations first, and then after that it becomes possible. So again, you use some of the earlier stuff I've talked about in this stream to identify that. But a good way of talking about it is you knock and he opens the door. You ask and he answers. You seek and he finds you. You outstretch your open hand to a father and he lifts you up. Another analogy is, again, thinking about this like wings. By morally developing, you're turning, like I said, the 5 dark currents of the will, which bring about the hands, the legs, and the head, or the low empirical intellect. It's transformed into proper heart. That's one, which is the will to power is changed to heart. It's the will to service. It's transformed into will to service, which makes it a wound. Like your 5 senses are wounds. You receive the world through your 5 senses, right? They're wounds in that way. You can turn the will into a sense, which are these pre-fall faculties that we've been talking about. So you turn the will to grasp at the expense of others, the will to advance at the expense of others, and the will to power into which is symbolized by the head and the concrete or dead heart. The heart comes back to life. Love, will to service comes from that. Service of the divine through you to help others. And again, you just follow divine will. And all those things, those wills become senses. So that's what happens. But if you try to load this up like a technique, even every day, it's good to take notes. Oh, what happened there? Oh, I must remember to balance more. If you try like sort of it's helpful to take notes on what occurs, but if you try to load it up like a procedure, I'll do exactly this like I did last time. What worked last prayer practice, as if from memory, and you'll interfere with your interactions and flow in the moment, and stop perhaps ideas that he sends you. And know-how, because there's a know-how that just develops over time. A know-how. But again, it is helpful to oh yeah, I see, I've forgotten that. You can remind yourself, but then just let it go and just do. It's a miraculous know-how that develops. That's the miracle. He sort of teaches you, your angel, your Angeloi teaches you how to do it over time. The more complicated aspects of the practice as you move from just this basic stuff that I'm talking about. So you got to be reminding yourself, it's not a technique, it's not a technique, it's not a technique. There's no perfect procedure and process, and this thing is completed. Oh, initiation's done now. I did the procedure perfectly. Yes, I'm the master. There's no perfect procedure. It's a miraculous know-how because it's always collaborative. And that's what you need to learn. Just do, don't try achieve anything as an outcome. The reason that is because it's not a technique, like I've said, and you are not in control of divine communication and outcomes. If you do this subconsciously, the Lord knows and will wait for you to slowly learn this and understand. And so you got to recognize that. The point is to understand that you are not trying to achieve a modern goal. You must not lust after an outcome. Remind yourself of the attitude that things will happen when you are ready. Practice is hard for the Westerner, but you must learn to be humble and not try will an outcome to happen. You've got to be purified first. Don't lust for the heights of the spiritual experience as a goal. For joy, you're seeking the truth that is the Lord. That's the only goal you should have. Because if you don't seek truth, if you seek joy of spiritual experience, you'll be given that in this. But it'll come from the world. It'll come from the whore of Babylon, who's sort of it's sort of the partner of Lucifer in a way. Whore of Babylon, the illusory realm that we talked about earlier. You'll get joy, but also lies. Okay. Don't try achieve. Seek truth. Do diligent preparations and practices. Don't try achieve. Engage in serious play. So each practice, you serious play. That's a direct quote from Valentin Tomberg. Serious play. The Angeloi, changing your breathing, will first happen 30 minutes or so into the practice. I think I've talked about that part already. Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's an important point. That when you do start to receive this, like that you might sort of, the modern that's left in you might sort of start even, you want to be careful not to, you won't ever think it's you, but like sort of take it for granted because you become more used to it. So you've got to constantly recognize and thank God for the miracle of that he's allowed you. What a great gift that you get to experience this small demonstration of grace every morning. My gosh, you know, it takes a lot of practice, but it's his gift to you. And you must never forget that. If you do experience any of these things, like what a blessing that is for so many people. But what a responsibility as well, because so many people feed my sheep. Feed my sheep. It's not just for you. Don't be casual about this stuff. That's why you have icons, you know? That's why you prostrate yourself at the end of every morning prayer. I'll, of course, thank the Lord. I pray specific prayers at the end. Once my alarm goes off after an hour and a half, I've got specific prayers of things that I'm working on. I pray for faith, hope, and charity, for purification, illumination, union, among other things. And for development in these aspects, I'll pray for help with them. Teach me, Lord, I pray thee. But of course, you start by praying for others. Pray for the world. Pray for those in purgatory, because who is going to? You know, it's a real thing. Prayer helps those people after death. So I pray for those things first, and then I'll pray for certain things that help me help them. I pray a lot. Help me help them, the others. Help the people that watch my videos to work out how to do this. But then after all that, I will go down on the ground, put my head on the ground and thank him. The reason I started, well, you know, it's an important part of Eastern Orthodoxy, but a key part is that it would come to me, oh, put your head down. And then I would get the sort of Luciferic temptation saying, oh, you don't need to do that or something. And I just go, I override that now. It's like, oh, what are you up to trying to stop me doing that? And so even if I was just walking down the street, I've done that a few times, is when you get the temptation not to, that's something that needs to be overcome, I think. And so you just do it. And more that just becomes easier. It's a kind of sophronism that develops where you just don't care and you're happy to be publicly showing these things because that's what matters. Not a worldly paganism that worldliness that looks down on you and the Lord and their true God that they need to see. No, do it. There's no embarrassment. Well, anyway, these things develop. These things develop. That's what's so great about blessing people is that you can do these things that no one's watching or no one knows what's happening and you're actually helping them. And then a sophrosyn develops out of that where, say, you will actually naturally just feel like helping other people. Because your will to power, it's hard at the start where I don't want to help that person across the street. I hope someone else does or whatever rather than me. Again, it's a duty because when it starts as a duty, but it's easier. It's a nice roundabout way of doing it where you've prayed for it and it's granted to you and then you'll naturally just want to do it later rather than doing it like a brute forcing of I'm going to go work at a soup kitchen. Of course you pay your debts and that's important and we'll get to that because I'm not even through this. We've got a while to go here with this lecture, but anyway, I digress. It's a blessing. This is what grace is in a deeply practical demonstration every morning. What a blessing. And even demons, they'll try to make you doubt things, like I said earlier. And they'll only make sense in the isolated thing. It's the spirit of critical modernity. And it's psychological. It's psychological. Scientific. Right? I know the scientific method. I've got books on it on my shelf. Falsifiability. Generalizability. Repeatability. Repeatable experiment. Repeatable experiment. Yeah, so you don't need to, isolated arguments will try tempt you all the time, even throughout the day. But when you think about it with the grand evidence that's been acquired it won't make any sense. So you don't need to listen to that. Temptations like these, I think I've talked about that before. I talked about that in an earlier slide. So you'll notice in this breathing, which you don't control the speed of, it's a dynamic rhythm, sometimes slow, mostly faster rhythm that changes in rhythm. It's not you doing it. You just collaborate with it. It seems like a precise amount is determined by something higher than you, doesn't it? If you speed your breath up under your own steam, it's hyperventilating, right? Or whatever. It's pins and needles, right? This is for people that are deeply involved in this. If you experience Christian breathing, there's no pins and needles. There's no anything like that. It has no effect like that. It's just calming. It's just it's not the breath that does it. It's not for you. It's the Angeloi. Again, these are deep mysteries that I don't know how much I should be talking openly about them, but this is for people we're in a time where we're in dangerous time. So we have to be upfront, clearer about this. Yeah, but that's why you'll notice it's nothing like what any technique is because there's no effect on you. There's no effect. It doesn't come from the breathing. The breathing isn't for you. It's for the Angeloi that's doing the breathing. It's for the Lord to get closer to you. It's the Lord and his Angeloi that come closer to you through that breathing. And there's no effect. And that's how you know that it's something else is going on because you're coming calmer. But if you go and breathe under your own steam, like I said, pins and needles, overstimulation. That does not happen at all. You become calmer, if anything. It's not the breath. The physical breath isn't breathing. It's to do with that, but it's not for you. It's just something else. Like we've talked about, like Valentin talks about, and we've cited him earlier in this. It's the angel's breath helps him draw closer to you. And so in general, we've talked about some other phenomenology already today, but what's a roundabout phenomena we might notice? So if you're a beginner, you'll notice some, again, this is a phenomenology we've talked about before. You might notice some colors transparently over vision, which is related to, healing of the blind man. So these faculties, it's just visual is secondary. You shouldn't even be thinking about that, right? It's a signpost things are happening. That's it. All that it's saying, you're starting to, you can think about philosophically what it is later on, but it's just a signpost that you're starting to look to the depths of things. That's it. Just continue your attending and what you're supposed to be attending. Nothing will come of seeking any visual thing while you're in your practice. It's just a distraction from the practice. And we talk about this in previous lectures about the epistemic principle and what faculties are primary, which are, as the saints talk about, the fire of Emmaus, or the loving heart. That's primary to know what's truth. Or spiritual touch, which symbolizes the immediacy of touch. It's felt sort of behind the eyes, but also it's like a second sense over the whole body. That's primary. And the heart is how you know what's true or not, and how you discern. The visual, again, the Orthodox are right, and Seraphim Rose is right to be, so let's put that to the side. It's no, like that's, so don't be concerned about that. It's primary where you're actually having contact with him is these other things I just mentioned, fire of Emmaus. And look at the lecture I've got on the epistemic principle. I'm just mentioning some phenomena that you'll notice when you start these things in your prayer, some visual things. They'll just distract you. Don't worry about it. Continue your attending. Note them. It's fine to see them. It's just a signpost. Things are happening as your feet are being washed. Now, after practice, what you might start to notice is when you're attending the all of vision, you'll notice some shuddering or movement as if behind world. That's it. This is not with any breathing or anything. This is like, I'm talking about well before any type of grace or anything happens. I'm just saying when you're doing your prayers and concentrations without effort, you might notice that phenomena. That's good. It's showing you that the sense world isn't the true essence of things. And again, what you'll eventually notice from that, is this zone of silence I've been talking about. So you'll notice the zone, this is where spiritual touch happens. It's behind the eyes. And again, this is just where you notice it in your sensory network. Is that, again, it's not physical, but it's behind the eyes and behind the forehead. You'll notice it there. And some other people in the fellowship have talked about that, so it's happened for them as well. And it's funny when he repeated this, is he said, at first I had to confirm it wasn't eye strain or anything. And I'm like, that's exactly what I went through. I was like, what's this? Because he's just trying to figure it out. But that's what Valentin Tomberg is talking about when he says the zone of silence. It's it's spiritual touch behind the eyes. But that's the region in which you'll have contact with the Lord primarily. And close to that is the zone you attend, the emotive zone, right? When I'm talking about the emotive zone, where you feel your mood. That's what's being talked about when the saints say, look at the heart. They're not saying look at the physical heart. They're saying look at the heart, the emotiveness, to know the truth of things. The heart and a loving heart opens that divine emotiveness in that sense. Again, look at my lectures on the lecture on it, which is called Epistemic Principle, our criterion for truth, how to know the spiritual experience is true. We're very careful about spiritual deception. So you may, you might first think it's eye sprain because it's behind, but it's not. You'll recognize that it's not. And eventually it's like you have a second sense all over your body in terms of spiritual touch. But again, it's primarily behind the eyes. These are just things you'll notice. Like it's sort of in that order. Like before any graces, as you're purifying yourself. And you might notice in that behind the eye area I've talked about this before in a previous stream. I'm just trying to give you a sense of what changes that come before you even receive any grace or anything like that. Is that behind the eyes, it feels like breath in that sense behind the eyes, like phlegmy lungs. And that is part of feeling divine breath. You feel it there, the divine breath in you behind the eyes. But it's analogous to the feeling of sort of phlegmy lungs, a breath, but at you there. Again, this will make no sense to people who aren't involved in any of this stuff. It's confirmed by Valentin Tomberg. And these are experiences I have direct mystical experience of. So it's also nested in the experience of Christian mystics and the saints. So these are things that are thought deeply about before I'm talking to you about them, and I've confirmed them and spent a lot of time with them in Pythagorean silence, in that silence that you're supposed to have before you talk about it. Because in our epistemic principle, in the epistemic principle criterion for truth, part of that is confirming it with other people of health, saints. It's a community of people that we're dealing with. You don't just have your own experience of things. So all the stuff I'm talking about is I'm doing that same thing. And you should too. When you look at things for yourself, you should read these people and confirm them, not just take my word for it. So to avoid, you don't want to be deceived. And it's just part of the reason why I'm sharing it with you. So that feels like there, or vibrations or rumbling in that area. You'll notice. After these sorts of things become more common, then after the zone of silence, after you know the spiritual touch, there's no speeding up of the breath or anything before this stuff happens. It's also related to your moral purification. It's not going to happen unless you also stop sinning. It's not going to happen without the 3 oaths. After that, will grace become available? After you've faced the temptations too. So you'll notice the subtle impulse. You've got to. It takes time. Like I said, these things are all confirmed by other people. Okay. Let's understand a bit more about your guardian Angeloi then, who is actually involved in, and we see in this diagram, is involved in this process and is involved deeply in the temperance of this practice, the temperance of your vital forces, your psychological forces, your physical vital forces. Your guardian has always been helping you with these things. You just don't know it. And so to understand this, let's first understand what guides you in this process, what protects you from spiritual danger. Again, you need to do work yourself as well, but you have someone helping you. To understand this, we need to understand the doctrine of the divine image and likeness. God made man in his image and likeness from Genesis. The divine image and the divine likeness coincided. And this is from a saint. I should have written down the saint that this is. But, maybe I've got it here somewhere. I can't remember. But that's okay. We're just going to go on with it. Oh, Saint Bernard. So, the divine image and divine likeness. They coincided. It did not persist after the fall. And this is related to what? The faculties we used to have before we fell to original sin. When we were connected to God, we're reestablishing that with his collaboration with him. Divine image and divine likeness. What does that mean? Well, we'll talk about where the empirical subject is now, but let's talk about what those two things are. The divine image is your essential structure. He is, or it is, or you could also call it the transcendent self. It's not something you can see. It can't be damaged. It can't be wounded by your sin. It always remains, no matter what. It can be burned, but it always remains. The image of God. It's the essential structure of the human being. Now, the degree to which you are, or what's the likeness? The likeness is the functional structure, virtue engine, or sin engine. The functional structure is the executor. It's the person, heredity, character, the different things that you are that execute in the world. The functional structure. Now, the degree to which you are, as we said, from original sin, we've been warped. The likeness has been warped. The likeness of God. And it can be damaged and destroyed. And this is what we're changing to try and make the empirical subject this divine likeness from the non-likeness state that we are. So the functional structure of a sort of parasitic will to power, which comes from the fall, needs to be transformed into a will to service to become like the divine likeness. And in that process, the faculties we had before the fall of the new Adam come about. the functional structure returns. Now, what has happened because of the fall? Something makes up for it because we don't have the faculties we used to have from connection with God, the divine instinct, like we've talked about, the various things we've talked about. We don't have that in the modern state. What makes up for it? The angel is sent to help you, to guard you, because you don't have these functional structures connected anymore to the Lord. And so your guardian Angeloi helps you walk up the ladder to return to the likeness. And so you begin with, let's say, you begin with a personal mission. The Angeloi is considered to, you could consider, it's sort of related to your ego as well, right? Because it's about your personal mission. As you go up this path, the Angeloi actually, as you'll have the faculties, you become that Angeloi in a way. Your wings are granted to you, and you don't need him or her anymore. So his part of the image, you could call it, he goes to some other mission that the Lord determines somewhere else, whatever. And what replaces him is an Archangeloi. And as you develop even further, you might then have a mission for a group of people, which Archangeloi are related to, folk Archangeloi. As you develop further, that Archangeloi will also leave. And again, you're gaining the qualities and faculties that Archangeloi is making up for in communications with you as you move towards the Lord. And then you'll have a mission granted to you for of interest and of need of all of humanity. And then Archai will, an Archai will replace that. And further on, if you keep developing, and this is going into the depth of the most saintly people, an Excusii will replace or a power will replace the Archai, or time spirit, or epochal spirit. And then your mission will be relevant to divine humanity. So humanity as a whole and divine humanity, then you're doing a mission for Christ. And this is where you have saints have stigmata and such. That's when they're doing a mission for a power. So that's the next hierarchy. That's the second hierarchy of Angeloi. And so on. And that's working for Christ then. So that's kind of how that part works of it. But let's just understand a little bit more about. And so that understanding a bit more about the likeness, looking at my notes here, the likeness in him is the totality of the functions, functional structure. The essential structure we were talking about, it's the essential structure of the human being, the image, which is indestructible and which establishes freedom in an unalienable, irremovable way. Man is free and remains so for all eternity on earth, in hell, in purgatory, and in heaven, always and everywhere. Freedom is therefore an absolute fact. The functional structure, the likeness, the executor, is the empirical self we always talk about. The non-likeness, or the likeness, you're going from the non-likeness to the likeness. That's the totality of the functions of the human being. Hotbed of sin with its attractions towards evil has taken root there, and it is immortal only in proportion to the measure that it conforms again to its image, to the essential structure. Then it's the likeness, if you conform to your image, your transcendent self. The likeness remains in the soul that accomplishes the good. In the soul that sins, it's wretchedly transformed. Man is made in the image and likeness of God, and in image he possesses freedom of will, in likeness he possesses virtues, in non-likeness he possesses sins. And so let's understand a bit more about this too. And again, this temperance is, you see the symbol of this Angeloi, That's also passive active. That's to do with inspiration as well. It's that something's being poured from a jug, a cup, or an eye, or an eye, as in eye, transcendent self, eye above you, and eye below. Those three symbols help you to understand what's going on here. It's from one cup to another, you're the empirical self, an eye, or an I, as in I am. So two. Those three symbols coincide: an Angeloi, a cup, and I am. And there's a 45-degree angle here in this symbol, which shows you how inspiration works. It's active, passive, as we've been talking about. And so you've got the image as one cup and the likeness as the other. The executor and the contemplator of God, the thing that's in permanent contemplation with God, your image, your transcendent self. And the angel helps bring these things and mix these things and allow, because if you were completely annihilated by the divine image, it'd be dangerous, right? So it's with your moral development in mind that the angel is helping you, the Angeloi is helping you, and the Lord is helping you. And so what does the guardian Angeloi do? It accompanies as a faithful ally the divine image in man, just as vicious inclinations have made their way into the human functional organism, which was, before the fall, the divine likeness. The Angeloi acquits his charge in 5 ways. He guards, cherishes, protects, visits, and defends. He is therefore a flaming star, a luminous pentagram above man. That's from Valentin Tomberg. Again, pentagram is a old symbol from Christianity, not what it's become from the bad people. Those symbols will guide you in what manifests for you as well. Won't go into it any more than that. 2, vicious inclinations accompany the divine, the likeness, the non-likeness. Tempters and demons. The guardian Angeloi undertakes the functions destroyed by original sin to help, like I said, in the likeness and fills the breach wrought by them. He substitutes himself for functions destroyed from the fall. And so the empirical self, as a non-likeness, where are you before you start? You're a warped, sinful person. And you need help, and your guardian Angeloi will help you. And so I rarely addressed the Angeloi by name. I was always just praying to the Lord. But it's important to know it's there, protecting you and helping you. Real beings. It's a ladder, you know. If you don't see a hierarchy, that's not good. There was also something Rudolf Steiner said about if you don't acknowledge the Angeloi in the hierarchy, you might actually worship your angel by accident. And he believed that a lot of Protestantism was doing that, thinking a sort of personal Angeloi was God, because they don't acknowledge the hierarchy. So you need to acknowledge the hierarchy of angels, man, because you might end up actually worse. And you can see that in the schisms that occur in Protestantism. Come from the personal mission and arbitrariness, because the angel is related to your personal mission. You have to ascend the hierarchy more to do a mission for Christ, Christianity, whatever. So by not acknowledging the Angeloi, you actually end up perhaps, just perhaps, worshipping an Angeloi and not the Lord by not acknowledging them. So, which does seem to explain a lot of the schisms. And so progression through what happens, it's de-egoism, loving all. As you develop spiritually and morally, the empirical self that is you regains faculties, and the Angeloi is replaced by one higher in the hierarchy. Other beings from the hierarchy replace the original Angeloi and grant you a higher mission. But also, again, the faculties develop and become more clear as you understand more and more and more. I've talked about all that, I think. I think we're moving on here. And so the Angeloi protects the right, without you knowing, protects the right balance of vital forces in the physical, vital, spiritual being that you are. It's a healthy system of respiration. Because you, again, the forces higher than you can only determine these things. It's the difference between the West and the East again. The idea that you can balance these forces is just silly and dangerous. But, so all we talked about techniques and practices and Angeloi and collaboration and all these different things. We've talked about the three O's, but we haven't really talked about the moral debt that has to be paid. It's about, again, I've talked about this before, it's about forgiveness, about sin. So it's not, yes, the most important practice is that morning practice, but you still have to do all the other stuff in your daily life. You have to stop sinning and do all these various things. You have to pay your debts. You have to forgive. You have to ask for forgiveness for everything you've done that's sinful. And so what governs that? An Archangeloi. And why is an Archangeloi? Is also conscience when he's revealed. Why is it an Archangeloi? Because an Archangeloi is related to a folk, a group of people. It's connected with the collective. And you have sinned in reality against people and other people. So of course it makes sense that that's the case. But morality, the ground of reality is morality. To move further in the spiritual development, to have the right to move further, to be allowed to move further, you have to do all the practices I've talked about in moral development. Again, like I said, forgiveness. I've got the tradition talks about this and what you do. I've got that described in lectures I've got on the practices. Think about the Archangeloi, your conscience that you eventually begin to be able to communicate with. Think about him like your older brother. But you have to pay your debts. You have to pay your debts. You can pay them by blessing other people, though. That's how you pay them. Because there's things that, again, the Lord came and said, you will be forgiven if you forgive others. So if you forgive others, you'll be forgiven. And how do you forgive others? Not by saying, I forgive them. You can atone, but you don't have to. You can pray for the Lord to bless them. And I've talked about this again, how to do that in a way that it's not, you're not praying for anyone to get their dark desires met, or you're praying for them simply to acknowledge the Lord as the true master, the true Lord. That's it. Everyone can do that for it doesn't matter what sin's been done against you. So if you bless all those people, you're paying your debts. If you're walking during the day, like I've said before, you're paying the debt that conscience demands you, and conscience helps you. Again, let's just talk about conscience for a second. Conscience, which is the Archangeloi, which helps you like an older brother, you have no access to this conscience in the modern state. It's only when you start these practices that inklings begin to come. You think you've got conscience, you've just got actually a calculation from prejudice that comes from character and heredity and what you've inherited and mimetically absorbed. And you make a judge. You can judge things, but it's based on your limited mortal self. It's not from conscience. Conscience is not, or it might be a sort of personal conscience. Again, that conscience is based on your prejudices. We're talking about an objective being. And so you have to have that moral development to make contact with this objective being. And this objective being sends you divine instinct, divine intonation. It's the Lord that directs them to do this. So you might as well just think about it like the Lord. But you do need to acknowledge these things exist, like I said earlier. Within this process, you're doing all the practices, you're morally developing. What becomes available is intuition from conscience. Conscience at the start can only communicate to you through dreams, because in your waking state, you're so driven by the will to power that this angel can't get to you, because the air, like we said, is poisonous for him. And so he can only communicate to you through dreams. The unconscious can only communicate to you through dreams. As you develop, you go to sleep and wake up at the same time. Like I said, you're doing these practices in the morning in poverty. He begins to be able to move from this distant place to while you're conscious to be able to communicate with you, sort of parallel state. and you begin to unify as you start to listen to him. You can ask him questions. You can ask the Lord questions, and intuitions, practical, moral, and the truth. These intuitions are the true, good, and beautiful, the way, truth, and life. You'll notice a discernment of what these things are, but also what they feel like. Now, you do know from the tradition what people talk about conscience, that it's felt as a negative not to do something before you do it, and then a deep, remorseful feeling after you do it. We're familiar with that understanding of conscience. We're not so familiar with the positive version of that, where you get a positive impulsion, a good feeling to do something before you do it, and after you do it, a peace and a joy. That's connected with a divine being. And so that's also a clue as to how you communicate once you've developed these faculties. And I'll talk in future streams how to do the intermediate practice of actually asking questions and how do you determine yes and no answer. But the chief principle is humility and recognizing it's the divine person. Because if you're not thanking him after every question, thinking it's like a procedure or a faculty like your movement of your arm, you'll be tempted to do that. You'll just think, oh yeah, no. It's humility in everything. You're talking to a person. Might not always speak to you in words, but you won't get an answer unless you have that deep humility and love. And so the more you communicate, you start not listening to the low calculative intellect and you ask him, what should I do here? Or you feel an impulsion or grace. And the more you do that, the more you unify with him. He's helping you, lead you to him, lead you to the Lord. The Angeloi want nothing more than to lead you to union with God. So it's nothing greater than that. You have to pay your debts for it to happen. You've all got debts. But then when it becomes available, that you can ask him what to do. And again, of course, the Angeloi, the Lord, they know everything. So you can rely on that. It will be a mystery to you why he might tell you to do this or that. Your calculative mind will jump forward and think why, and then it will only make sense later. But it's a deep gift, and more you develop the certainty of the martyr and the collaborative know-how of the thaumaturgist, the sacred magic, if you call it. That's what this is. And so that's where you are. In an intermediate stage, you begin to be able to ask. It took a long time to work out how to actually do this. It's something, it's a know-how over time that you learn. But humility is key, and recognizing you're talking with real divine beings. Humility, love, because they are above you. So they want to wash your feet, but you have to learn. And if you don't learn, you won't get an answer. If you don't learn humility, and they'll wait until you learn, because they don't want to interfere with your freedom, you see. So it's a mystery, but it all begins to make sense. And so that's how and then this is something that's described by the great philosophers, Steiner, Henry Bergson. What happens in this process as you go towards him, what's happening is that you leave the milieu of the intellect and the space that you are, and you can see into the essence of things through the faculty of sympathy, through love. That's why you love nature. That's why you love the hierarchies and the angels. That's why you love your fellow man, so you can see to the essence of things. These are the faculties that awaken through love. And so this is what philosophers also understand. But this intuition is both a faculty that you receive, but as you go towards it, it eventually becomes an immediate communication. This is what the actual language of Angeloi is. It's not some character on a piece of paper like John Dee was looking for. It's an immediate knowing. And eventually, again, you unite with divine wisdom. So the intuitions you're getting lead to the final intuition, which is an in-teaching or ingression of the Lord, where YHVH becomes a fact of your experience with you always and can never be taken away from you, the presence of God. You walk with God. That's what the conscience leads you to. That's why you're constantly asking him, should I do this? Should I say this? Blah, 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 always. You're led by him, not your calculative low intellect or your vicious inclinations. And he's healing you of those inclinations over time. That's why this conscience is so important. And it's the sword. It's the sword of love, but also it burns for people who are sinners. And the scales here in the symbol show you the balance that must be paid to go further. You have to let go of your lust for power and self-interest, the juvenile desire for conquest. All these people posting. I see Christians posting, I want to conquer. It's juvenile. You've got to let go of this. The Lord will direct you what to do. The Lord may direct you to go and defeat an enemy. But it's not you, the low empirical subject, that lusts after it. No. That's what this revealing of divine instinct is all about. That you're supposed to be the herald of the master in a very real, concrete way. That's what we've been talking about grace here. And no, people don't have this. They can, though, if they're just willing to put in an hour in the morning. You can unlock this. Well, collaboratively. You have to pay your debts, though. But it's just the modernity is going to stop so many people, but it can be done. We have to help other people do this because it's something beyond just going to church. Church is part of it, but beyond just going to church and praying, you got to do everything. You got to do the concentration. You have to go into the wilderness. You can do this. More people need to now. We need an organized minority of people in fellowship. So leadership actually is governed by the Lord. We need heralds of the master, not people that say they're heralds and actually say they're governed by the master, and they're just only doing it sort of by a kind of duty and Kantian duty, top down, or idea superstructure, but have the Lord with them. It can be done in this process. I've gone through it. It's a ladder that continues, but all these faculties I'm talking about have awakened for me in this process. Valentin Tomberg also talks about it. You can do this. So that's everything. We'll do a part 2 over in the Discord now. For fellowship members, join at scottmanu.com/fellowship. I'll now take a look at your questions and what you said, and we'll talk about that. Then we'll jump over into the Discord, friends, beloved friends. I hope that helps you. I hope that helps you. It should. Pay your debts. All right. Let's have a look, friends, where we are. Hopefully the stream didn't stop or something. That would be horror, wouldn't it? That will be horrible. Yeah, it's all good. It's working. Background on the text wall is distracting. Oh, well, sorry about that. Then you are not yet enlightened, Leonard. Not to be pedantic, but you should probably change the title to Breathe In, not Breathe. Oh, yeah, probably. Love your channel and videos, though. Fantastic thoughts and insights. Thank you, Ignis. Boy, oh boy, should I have listened to it more. Okay, I don't think there's anything else said here. I'll have a look at the Twitter, and we'll jump over to the Discord. See if anyone said anything on the Twitter here. There we are. Don't want to not address anything before we go. Looks like that's it. All right. And I'll just check the old thing. All right, everybody. God bless you. God help you in moving towards Him, disclosing Him through your love of Him.